So there's Gustavo's picture. Gustavo is possibly our biggest star. He got his degree here in, I think it was in forestry, the forest resources, actually. He is a biologist and was a very active researcher. He's got 150 scientific publications, but he's done a lot of other things as well. The first thing he did when he went back to Brazil was to create a department of ecology for the graduate program at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, which became a really important department for training conservation biologists. And in the 1990s, he and I got a grant to work, because I had worked at that same university with social scientists, demographers, and economists as part of my Amazon work. So we put those two groups together at the university. They had never worked together before. Again, this sort of model of the TCD approach. We did a conference and produced this book, which I had completely forgotten about until last year. Then Gustavo went on with his colleagues at the university to get a huge grant, $1.5 million, to work on a big program in Minas in an interdisciplinary way. So that was a really great sort of cloning of the TCD approach in a Brazilian university. And at the same time, he was pretty much running Conservation International in Brazil. And then later moved to Washington, where he became director of something called the Center for Applied Biodiversity. And since 2007, he's been with the Global Environment Fund, where he's now director of programs. So his portfolio that he manages is a trust fund of over $4 billion with 39 donor countries, focusing on environmental issues around the world. So Gustavo is making a huge impact. I didn't ask him to talk about his work at the World Bank with the Global Environment Fund. I asked him to talk about this university program, and I have no idea actually what's happening there these days or to what extent Gustavo might still be involved. But that's since the theme of today was TCD-inspired programs, I was asking him to reflect on that, and we can also ask him questions about these huge programs he's directing now. So thank you, Gustavo, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks very much, Marianne, and I see Betty there too. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure speaking to you. I'm at my office here at the Global Environment Facility, which is housed within the World Bank offices. It's kind of an odd place to be as a conservationist. I'm surrounded by the World Bank, the IMF, and the White House. So it's a bit of a contradiction in terms, but on the other hand, you have access to a lot of levers that we can use for conservation and to try to mainstream conservation and environment in the development agenda in a very effective way. So it's a great place to be and a challenge at the same time, and also bring some additional perspectives to the work that we all do. But again, Marianne asked me to talk a bit about the history with the program at UFMG in Brazil, which we initiated in 1989 with the first cohort of graduate students at the master's and PhD level. And it was I would say, the first graduate program in Brazil with explicit goal of dealing with biology from one standpoint, conservation from another, but also get an interdisciplinary approach to this by bringing social sciences into the mix. And that was the innovation. To be frank with you, when I started doing conservation biology, it was very much a very technocratic kind of science. you worked on it basically from the perspective of the biology of organisms, by the ecology of the habitats. You try to use some proxies in terms of minimum viable population sizes and the genetics behind it. And then you arrive at the conclusion and say, well, this is a solution, let's move with it. But the people equation was almost never there. So we had the solution, and as long as people get out of the way, we could actually do that. However, in practice, that seldom turned out to be the final solution to the problem, because things move, things evolve, people have different aspirations, different understanding of the value of nature and their own ambition in life. So over time it became quite clear that we needed something that, while bringing very strong, solid precepts from population biology, genetics, and everything that goes into input for the development of conservation strategies, we also need strategies that deal with the social side of things. And of course, there are social sciences that can speak to this very effectively, from anthropology, social sciences, and psychology, behavior change. And so the idea was to bring all of these skills to the students. It's easier said than done, because after all, you have a limited amount of time. If you're dealing with coursework, there's so much you can dedicate yourself to expanding your horizons. But I brought that experience from the University of Florida, which, by the way, I also came not necessarily looking for a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary education, but I kind of landed there by a series of accidents or actually fortunate accidents that I won trouble with. But I ended up actually with an office at the Center for Latin American Studies, in which I quickly made acquaintances of people like Marianne and others, and started taking courses with her and people like Marvin Harris on the anthropology side, which gave me a different perspective. And I found that extremely exciting and illuminating, and opening a whole new horizon for the understanding of the natural world and how it interfaces with the social world and societies, and how decisions get eventually done, and you start learning techniques to deal with that in a more effective way, and you bring that back to your area of work, to your field, which essentially is conservation still. So that was the experience at the UF. And then when I was hired in between my master's and PhD to the University of Minas Gerais, Federal University of Minas Gerais. So I was doing my my field work for my PhD there, and I took the exam there. There was a position open. I got it. Then I came to finish for another year at the University of Florida. And while I was there, while I was doing my PhD, I started to talk to certain people in the faculty of the zoology department to say, I think we should explore this. And I found a couple of champions there that wanted to do this, and that was the beginning of it. And it was fortunate, because UFMG is a very big university. It has about 40,000 students. 15,000 of them are graduate students. It has some 70 to 80 different bachelor degrees, several institutes. It has about 3,000 faculty. So it's a real rich environment that one can try to fish for, additional expertise for something of this nature. I got a lot of support, which sometimes doesn't happen, from the administration of the university, from the Heitor, and a bunch of other folks from the director of the Institute of Biological Sciences to, start playing around with this. But in any university environment, things are not that simple. There's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of turfs. There's a lot of things that you have to convince people in order to create. But long story short, we managed to jumpstart the first cohort in '89, and over time, I think we made a lot of progress. And I believe I was trying to look at the latest statistics, but I think since then, the university has graduated 470 students at the master's and PhD level, which I think is quite a good outcome. And while I was still there, I also kept track of employment track records of these students, and it was quite good. We employed all over the place, from continuing in academia to the private sector to NGOs, international organizations, and so forth. So that was quite a successful experience. Today, it's rated by copies, which some of you know, as a 6, which is just one notch below the highest academic standard for a graduate program in Brazil. So we started actually at a 3 at the beginning. So it was also a very, very good outcome. But there were some elements that I think were important to do that. First of all, without some international infusion of faculty from different places that I brought as visiting professors, I think it would be, the curve would be much steeper than what we experimented. So we brought some people from University of Florida, from other places in the US and UK. And this was possible because I also managed to get money from NGOs and entities like the US Fish and Wildlife Service here in the United States had an international program on graduate education in conservation. And I managed to secure a multi-year grant that provided not only for that opportunity to bring faculty from different places for 6 months or a year, but also equipment and stipends for graduate students to go out in the field and conduct their research. At that time, the number of fellowships that were awarded by either CAPES or CNPq, the 2 entities that give this kind of support to Brazil, was limited. And also because it takes time for a new course to achieve enough standing to compete more aggressively for that limited number of fellowships that they offer every year. So that gave us a very nice jump start into this. And so these international cooperation agreements were instrumental in making the course take off very quickly. One of them was already mentioned by Marianne, was something we worked together to get, and we had a seminar in Belo Horizonte, which was quite interesting. That it brought also faculty and researchers from all over the place, in Latin America in particular, and attracted a lot of the students. And so that was also kind of another milestone that helped to bring this interdisciplinary view to the work that we do as biologists, anthropologists, sociologists, and so forth. That also led to another major grant that Marianne mentioned that we competed for, and it was a very unusual alliance between ourselves and the Biological Sciences Institute and something called CDPAR, which is a Center for Human Demography and Economics of the university. And we competed for a grant to do education and also research with an interdisciplinary slant to it that was conducted in the Rio Doce Valley in Brazil. And that was the focus of a graduate work by dozens of students over the years. And it helps cement that ability to speak across disciplines. And so that was also quite an important ingredient for success. So I'm very happy looking back. I don't teach anymore over there. I actually had my last doctoral student defend his dissertation last year, and I said, I'm not going to do this at the distance anymore. I've been doing this for the last 10 years, having always 2 or 3 graduate students that I supervise at a distance, but it became too complicated. So it was very nice. At that time, when the course started, we had several graduate programs in ecology in Brazil, but none was focused. And since then, many others have been created. I don't know at this stage how many there are, but I can count at least 6 or 7 that have the same objective all over the country. So it's not only the folks that graduated and benefited from the education they got at UFMG, but many others from other universities in Brazil, federal universities, state universities. So it was also a good outcome from that